The alien leader ordered the girl to be taken to another chamber. The walls of this place were alive with strange lights and moving shapes. Machines hummed with deep sound, and shadows danced across the floor. The girl walked slowly between two tall guards, but her steps were steady. She looked around with curious eyes, as if studying everything, as if she was the one in control. The guards felt uneasy, though they would never admit it. Inside the chamber, alien scientists prepared a test. They wanted to see how far they could push her. They had studied hundreds of races before, and fear always came quickly. But this girl had broken their expectations. The leader gave strict orders. Show her power, show her destruction, show her why no one stands against them. The crew obeyed. A large screen filled the wall. It showed images of Earth. Cities, oceans, mountains, forests. The girl recognized them immediately. Then, with a wave of the alien hand, the images changed. Fire spread across the cities. Oceans boiled and dried. Mountains cracked into dust. She saw her world destroyed before her eyes. The aliens expected her to cry, to scream, to fall to her knees. But she did not. She stood tall, her face calm. She whispered only one sentence. "Is this your truth, or only your fear of what could be?" The scientists exchanged confused looks. No one had ever spoken to them like this. They increased the images. They showed armies falling, children crying, skies burning red. But instead of fear, the girl's eyes grew sharper. She looked at the leader and said, "Humans have seen war before, humans have seen fire before, but they always rise again." The leader's jaw tightened. His empire had conquered countless planets. Most species broke at the first vision of destruction. But this human girl reminded him of something his kind had forgotten. She reminded him of resistance. He ordered a new test. A machine came alive behind her, a tall device with glowing lines. It was a memory probe. It could open the mind, search thoughts, expose weakness. The guards forced her to sit in the chair. Metal bands wrapped around her arms and legs. The machine sent a beam of light into her head. The scientists leaned forward, ready to see her deepest fears. But what they saw was not weakness. They saw images of human history. Men and women standing against storms, against wild beasts, against stronger enemies. They saw warriors fighting even when hope was gone. They saw mothers holding children in burning cities. They saw humans standing together, never giving up. The aliens stepped back. The images struck them harder than any weapon. They expected screams, but they saw courage. They expected pain, but they saw unity. The girl's memories were not only about suffering. They were about survival. Her heart carried the fire of her entire species. One scientist whispered that this was dangerous, that humans were not what they had thought. Another whispered that maybe this was only one strange human, but doubt was growing. The leader studied her face carefully. She looked at him with steady eyes, even with the machine probing her mind. He felt something heavy inside his chest. It was not fear, not anger. It was respect, though he refused to accept it. He shut down the machine with a wave of his hand. The bands unlocked, and the girl stood again. She did not fall, she did not shake. She simply brushed the dust from her clothes and looked directly at him. She asked him why he was so afraid of humans. Her words struck like a blade. The guards moved closer, their weapons ready, but the leader raised his hand and stopped them. The hall grew silent. The crew waited for his answer. But the leader said nothing. The girl walked a step closer. She spoke again, her voice soft but strong. She said humans are not the strongest, not the fastest, not the biggest. But they never stop fighting. Even when they lose everything, they rise. Even when death waits, they move forward. She said this was the true power of her kind. The leader's eyes burned brighter. He wanted to deny her words, to crush her spirit. But deep inside he knew she was not lying. He had seen fear many times, but this was something else. This was defiance born from history. This was strength that no weapon could erase. Some of the crew whispered among themselves. A few looked uneasy, as if seeds of doubt were already inside them. For the first time in their long journey across the stars, they wondered if this small blue planet might not be so weak after all. The girl stood in the middle of them, unarmed, alone, but stronger than all their power. She had turned their test into her victory. And as the aliens looked at her, they began to realize a truth they had never considered. They had not captured a fragile creature. They had awakened a force they did not understand. The girl was moved again, this time to a chamber that looked more like a place of science than of war. Strange glass tanks lined the walls, each filled with glowing liquid. Inside some of them floated creatures from other worlds, silent and unmoving. The air was heavy with the smell of metal and energy. The girl walked in calmly, her eyes moving from one tank to another. She seemed less like a prisoner and more like a visitor walking through a museum. The alien scientists gathered around her. They were smaller than the soldiers, but their minds were sharp and cold. They wanted to study her, to break down the mystery of her courage. They whispered to each other in their language, voices clicking and hissing, but the translator allowed her to understand. They said no creature had ever resisted the probe before. They said humans must be studied deeper. Perhaps there was something hidden inside their biology. The girl heard them but did not flinch. She stood in the center, her hands behind her back, and waited. One scientist stepped forward, carrying a new device. It was shaped like a crown, with sharp needles of light glowing at the edges. He placed it above her head, and the machine hummed. The needles did not pierce her skin, but they touched her mind, searching again. The aliens leaned closer to see what secret she would reveal. This time the images were stronger. They saw humans in battle, fighting in muddy fields with nothing but iron swords. They saw humans in burning cities, holding their ground against fire and stone. They saw humans flying through the sky in fragile machines, fighting wars above the clouds. They saw humans sailing across dark oceans, not knowing where they would land but never turning back. The scientists gasped. Each memory carried not just fear but also hope. Each struggle carried not just pain but also unity. The aliens had studied many races, but none carried such a balance of light and darkness. Most species broke when faced with death. Humans seemed to grow stronger. The girl watched their faces as they saw her memories. She could see the confusion in their eyes, the doubt growing deeper. She told them calmly that fear is not the end for humans. Fear is the beginning. It pushes them to stand, to fight, to protect. She said that on Earth, even children learn to face storms, hunger, and loss. That is why humans do not bend easily. The leader of the scientists frowned. He had always believed knowledge was the greatest power. Yet here stood a simple girl proving that strength of spirit was beyond any machine. He ordered more tests. They measured her heart, her blood, her brain activity. The numbers were normal. She was just a human girl, fragile compared to them. But her will was unshakable. The leader whispered to himself that perhaps power was not only in the body but also in something they could not measure. As the tests continued, the crew outside the chamber began to talk. Some soldiers wondered why the human was not afraid. Others laughed, saying she was only one girl, nothing more. But even those who laughed could not hide the strange weight pressing on their thoughts. They had seen her stand against their leader without trembling. They had seen her walk through fire and illusions without breaking. A question was forming in their hearts: if one human girl could stand like this, what would happen if they faced all of humanity together? The girl was released from the machine. She stood again without weakness. Her calmness was like a wall they could not climb. She looked at the tanks around her, at the silent creatures trapped in liquid. She asked softly if these were the others who had stood before them. The scientists said yes, they had tried, but all had failed. She nodded slowly and said perhaps they failed because they fought alone. Humans never fight alone. Her words spread through the chamber like fire. The scientists exchanged uneasy looks. They could not understand how such simple sentences could carry so much power. But the truth was clear. She was not afraid of them. She was not afraid of their empire. She carried something larger than herself. She carried the voice of her people. The leader entered the chamber again. He stared at her for a long time. His eyes glowed with fire, but inside him burned a different flame. For the first time, he felt something he had never wanted to feel toward a prisoner. Respect. He asked her why she was so calm, why she did not fear death. She looked at him and said because humans know death. They see it every day, but they still live. That is what makes them strong. The leader turned away, his cloak sweeping the floor. He said nothing, but his silence spoke louder than words. The scientists bowed, confused and restless. The girl stood alone in the center, but she was not the one trapped. It was the aliens who now felt the weight of invisible chains. Chains of doubt, chains of questions they had never asked before. For the first time in their endless journey, they began to wonder if their empire had finally found something it could not control. The alien ship drifted in the endless dark of space, but inside the walls were no longer calm. Whispers spread like fire. Soldiers spoke in quiet voices, scientists argued in low tones, and even the guards avoided looking into each other's eyes. Something had changed since the girl arrived. The fear they always expected was missing, and in its place grew something far more dangerous. Doubt. The leader of the ship sat in his tall chair inside the council hall. Around him stood his officers, armored and armed, their glowing eyes sharp. He looked at them one by one. He could see the questions in their faces, questions they dared not speak aloud. He slammed his clawed hand on the armrest, making the hall tremble. He said the human was weak, only one fragile creature. He said their empire had broken countless worlds, and Earth would be no different. His voice was thunder, but it did not erase the doubt. The girl was brought into the hall once more. She walked between guards with the same calm steps, her eyes unafraid, her face steady. She looked at the council as if she belonged there, as if she was not a prisoner but an equal. The silence of the hall was heavy as she stood before them. The leader demanded to know what gave her such courage. Did she not understand who they were? Did she not understand the size of their empire? Did she not see that resistance was hopeless? His words echoed like fire, but the girl only raised her head and spoke softly. She said she understood very well who they were. She said she saw their strength, their weapons, their power. But she also saw their fear. Fear not of her, but of what she represented. The crew shifted uneasily. Her words struck deep. She told them that humans could be many things. They could be cruel, they could be kind, they could be foolish, they could be wise. But one truth never changed. When pushed to the edge, humans rise together. She told them that Earth had faced storms, plagues, wars, and disasters, yet humans had survived every time. An officer snarled, calling her words empty. He stepped forward, his weapon humming with energy, and pressed it close to her chest. The girl did not move back. She looked straight into his eyes and said, "If you kill me, you will prove my words. You fear what humans are, even when faced with one unarmed girl." The officer's hand trembled. He wanted to strike, but something in her gaze stopped him. He pulled back slowly, shame burning inside him. The hall fell silent again. The leader watched closely, his mind heavy. He saw his strongest officer hesitate. He saw his soldiers shift their feet like nervous children. And he saw the girl standing tall, unshaken. He felt the balance of power in the room shift, not because of weapons, but because of words. Some aliens in the council began to whisper openly. One said humans might become dangerous allies. Another said they must be destroyed quickly before the infection of courage spread further. A third argued that perhaps destruction was impossible, that Earth might fight harder than any world before. The voices grew louder, filling the hall with division. The girl watched them with calm eyes. She spoke again, her voice cutting through their argument like a blade. She said humans are not perfect, but they are loyal. If you come as friends, they will stand with you. If you come as enemies, they will fight you until the end. Her words hung in the air like thunder without sound. The leader leaned forward in his chair. His glowing eyes locked on hers. He asked why she spoke of loyalty when she was alone. She smiled faintly and answered that humans are never truly alone. Every memory she carried, every story of her people, stood with her even here. And if one human could face them without fear, imagine what billions could do. The hall grew colder. Even the machines that hummed on the walls seemed to fall silent. The leader felt something inside him he had not felt for centuries. Uncertainty. He rose from his seat, his tall frame towering above her. He declared that humans would be tested, and soon the Empire would see if her words were true. His voice was iron, but it no longer felt unshakable. The girl did not reply. She simply stood still, her calmness like a mountain against a storm. And in that silence, every alien in the hall felt the weight of her presence. They had conquered countless worlds, but this one human had done something no army had achieved. She had made them doubt their own power. When the guards led her out, the whispers returned, louder than before. Division was growing inside the ship, spreading like cracks in stone. Some looked at her with hate, others with respect, and a few with something even stranger. Admiration. The leader sat back down, his claws curling tight around the armrest. His mind was filled with questions he could not silence. He had wanted fear. Instead, he had found something else. And he knew that something had the power to change not only the ship, but the entire empire. The alien ship was larger than any human city. It moved slowly across the silent darkness of space, a shadow against the stars. Inside the ship, thousands of eyes watched the blue planet below. Earth was small compared to their empire. The aliens had crossed galaxies, broken worlds, and enslaved many races. To them, humans were nothing but another primitive species waiting to be studied. The crew expected fear, panic, and easy control. Fear was always the first reaction of weaker life forms. But this time something was about to change. In the center of the ship, a human girl lay inside a glass chamber. She had been taken during a quiet night on Earth. She remembered nothing about the abduction. Her body floated in the strange light of the machine, her mind slowly waking up. Around her, the aliens stood tall, with skin like steel and eyes glowing with cold fire. Their voices were sharp, echoing in the chamber. They expected the same scene they had seen 100 times before, screaming, tears, begging for life. The glass chamber opened with a hiss. The girl slowly stood up. She looked around with calm eyes. She saw beings taller than any human, creatures with strange armor and weapons that hummed with energy. But her face did not twist in fear. She did not cry or fall to her knees. She simply looked at them and smiled. The aliens froze. Silence spread in the hall. This was not the reaction they expected. One alien officer stepped closer, towering above her. His claws were sharp, his voice deep as thunder. He spoke in his own tongue, and the translation device carried his words into her ears. He asked if she understood who they were, if she knew what they could do. She nodded lightly, as if listening to an ordinary question. The officer leaned closer, trying to see the fear in her eyes. But there was nothing. Only calm. Only confidence. The leader of the crew narrowed his glowing eyes. For centuries he had watched countless species tremble before him. To him, fear was the natural law of the universe. But this girl broke that law. Her heartbeat was steady, her breathing smooth, her hands relaxed. He ordered his soldiers to test her. They activated strange holograms, showing Earth destroyed, cities burning, oceans boiling. They thought her heart would break at the sight. But she stood still. She did not scream. She simply asked, "Is this what you plan to do, or is this only a show?" Her question spread like a spark among the crew. No prisoner had ever spoken with such calmness. Most begged for mercy before the first threat. This girl was different. She seemed to carry something the aliens could not measure. One scientist whispered that she might be broken, that her mind could not feel fear. Another argued that perhaps humans were stranger than they thought. The leader remained silent, watching her every move. She spoke again, her voice clear and simple. She asked why they had taken her. She asked what they wanted from Earth. Her words were not weak, they were steady like stone. The aliens did not know how to answer. For them, power was always one-sided. They gave commands, others obeyed. But here was a human asking questions as if she had the right to demand truth. The leader felt something he had never felt before. Doubt. The crew decided to push further. They brought forward their weapons, strange tools that could cut through mountains. They placed them before her, hoping to see her step back. But she walked closer, touching the cold surface of the weapon. Her fingers ran across it as if she was studying a piece of art. She looked into the eyes of the alien holding it and asked if this was the only strength they had. The guard felt his chest tighten. No one had ever spoken to him like this. The silence in the chamber grew heavy. Aliens who once laughed at the weakness of others now shifted uncomfortably. Some even lowered their eyes. They began to see something unfamiliar in her. She was not strong in size, not strong in weapons, but there was something else, something unmeasured. A force in her calmness. A strength in her lack of fear. The leader finally spoke. His voice echoed like iron striking stone. He asked her name. She told him softly. He repeated it, trying to understand the weight of it. A simple human name, yet it carried power in the way she said it. The leader leaned back in his tall seat. For the first time in many years, he wondered if his crew had captured more than just a simple human. Perhaps they had touched something greater. The girl stood silently, her eyes steady, her posture straight. Around her were monsters of legend, conquerors of stars. But she stood as if she belonged there, as if she was not their prisoner but their equal. The crew whispered among themselves, their cold eyes flicking between their leader and the girl. No one knew what would happen next. But one truth had already begun to grow in their hearts. This human was not like the others they had conquered. She was something new, something dangerous, something unforgettable. The ship moved through the cold silence of space, but inside, silence was broken by tension. The council had ended, but its shadow remained heavy. The girl was placed in a smaller chamber, guarded by 2 soldiers. The walls glowed with pale blue light, but the air felt tight, as if the ship itself was holding its breath. One guard stood stiff with anger. He looked at her with eyes that burned, as if he wanted to erase the doubt she had created. The other guard was different. His eyes shifted often, restless, uncertain. He had seen her in the council. He had felt the weight of her words. And though his training told him to see her as weak, his heart whispered that she was not. Hours passed, and the ship's hum echoed through the chamber. The girl sat quietly, her hands folded, her eyes steady. She did not ask for freedom, did not cry for help. She only waited. At last, the restless guard moved closer. He spoke in a low voice, careful not to be heard by the other. He asked why she was not afraid. She looked up at him and said simply that fear does not control her, it teaches her. The words struck him deeply. He had fought in battles, seen death, and felt fear many times. But never had he thought of fear as a teacher. He stared at her for a long moment, then made a choice. When the angry guard left to report, the restless one unlocked her restraints. He whispered that he would show her something. He led her through hidden corridors of the ship, where few dared to walk. The walls here were darker, colder. They passed rooms filled with strange weapons, machines that could tear apart a planet's defenses. The girl studied them with calm eyes. She asked if these weapons were meant for Earth. The guard lowered his head. Yes, he admitted, the Empire planned to test Earth soon. The girl did not panic. She did not beg. She placed her hand gently on the wall and spoke softly. She told him Earth had faced impossible enemies before. She spoke of small armies standing against mighty empires. She spoke of people who fought even when hope was gone, who turned weakness into strength. She said Earth was not perfect, but it never surrendered. The guard felt a weight in his chest. He had seen her memories in the chamber, but now her voice made them real. He began to believe her. He began to see Earth not as prey but as something dangerous and beautiful. They entered a high observation deck. From here, the planet below was visible through the wide glass. Earth glowed with blue oceans, green lands, and white clouds. The girl pressed her hand against the glass. She whispered that her people were down there, unaware of the danger above, but ready in spirit. She said the aliens thought of Earth as small, but they had no idea of the strength hidden inside its people. The guard stood beside her, silent. He felt torn between duty and truth. If he returned her, he would be praised. If he helped her, he would be called a traitor. Yet in that moment, he realized something powerful. The Empire had conquered countless worlds, but never one like this. This girl carried more than words. She carried fire. The girl turned to him. She thanked him for showing her the truth. She told him he had a choice, to follow fear, or to follow respect. Her voice was gentle, but it pierced his soul. He lowered his head, unable to speak. Behind them, the door hissed open. The angry guard had returned, his eyes blazing. He saw the restraints gone, saw the girl standing free, and his roar shook the chamber. He raised his weapon, ready to strike. But the restless guard stepped between them. His weapon stayed down, but his stance was firm. The two guards locked eyes, one burning with rage, the other with doubt and courage. The girl stood still, calm as ever. She knew this was not her battle to fight. This was theirs. The angry guard shouted that humans were nothing, that this girl was poison, that she must be destroyed. The restless guard said nothing. He only shook his head and whispered that perhaps she was the truth they had been blind to. The air grew heavy. The angry guard's weapon hummed with deadly light. But before he could strike, the restless guard's voice rang clear. He told him that killing her would not end the doubt. It would only prove she was right. The angry guard hesitated, his hands shaking with fury. Then, with a growl, he lowered his weapon and stormed out, leaving the air thick with tension. The girl looked at the restless guard and said softly that his choice had already been made. He had chosen to see her not as prey but as a mirror. He did not answer, but in his heart, he knew she was right. Together, they turned back to the glass, looking down at the planet below. The girl's calm voice filled the silence. She said the Empire thought they were testing Earth, but perhaps Earth was testing them. The council chamber was filled again. Tall figures stood in a wide circle, their eyes glowing in the dim light. The air was heavy, thicker than before. Every alien inside the hall knew the moment had come. The human girl was brought forward by guards. She walked calmly, her step steady as if she was not the one on trial but the one judging them. The leader of the ship stood on the high platform, his shadow stretching across the chamber. His voice boomed like thunder. He declared that the time for questions was over. Today, the fate of Earth would be decided. The crew watched in silence. Some faces burned with hatred, others with doubt, and a few with quiet respect. The girl stood in the center. The leader demanded her to speak. He wanted to hear her last words before judgment. He expected fear, begging, or silence. Instead, the girl raised her head and spoke clearly. She said they had come expecting fear, but humans were not slaves to fear. She said humans had faced fear for thousands of years and turned it into strength. The hall grew quiet. Her voice was not loud, but it carried through the walls like fire through dry wood. She spoke of Earth, of people who rose again after every disaster. She spoke of families who stood together, of strangers who became allies in dark times, of warriors who fought until their last breath. She said this was what made humans dangerous. Not size, not weapons, but spirit. One officer shouted angrily, calling her words lies. He raised his weapon, ready to silence her. But before he could act, another officer stopped him. Their weapons clashed, sparks flying. The chamber filled with shouting as voices rose against each other. Some cried that she must be destroyed. Others shouted that her words were true, that perhaps humanity was not an enemy but a future ally. The leader roared, ordering silence. The chamber shook with his anger. He glared at the girl, trying to break her calmness. But she stood tall, her eyes locked on his. She said if they came as enemies, Earth would fight until the last breath. But if they came as friends, Earth would give them loyalty stronger than any chain. Her words cut through the chaos. Even the leader felt his breath catch. He looked into her eyes and saw no weakness, no lie. He saw the fire of a whole species burning inside one small frame. For the first time in centuries, he felt unsure of his power. The restless guard who had helped her stepped forward. He dropped his weapon at her feet, bowing his head. Others followed, one by one, until a small group stood behind her. The rest of the hall watched in silence, the cracks in the Empire growing wider with every step. The leader's claws tightened on his armrest. His empire had always ruled with fear, but this girl had done what no army could do. She had planted doubt inside his strongest warriors. He realized something terrible. If one human could change his crew like this, what would happen when they faced the entire human race? The girl spoke once more. She told them that Earth was not waiting to be conquered. Earth was waiting to be met. She said they could choose war, but they would lose more than they could imagine. Or they could choose alliance, and together they would be stronger than ever before. The chamber was silent. No one moved, no one spoke. The leader stood slowly, his tall frame looming above them all. His glowing eyes locked on her, searching for weakness. But he found none. At last, he turned away, his cloak sweeping the floor. He said only one sentence. "Perhaps this war will not begin today." The council broke in silence. The girl was led away, but not as a prisoner. The guards who once held chains now walked beside her without touching her. Whispers followed her through the corridors, whispers not of weakness but of respect. She stood once more at the glass window, looking down at Earth, glowing in the dark. The restless guards stood beside her, silent. The girl placed her hand against the glass and whispered that they had not expected this reaction. They had expected fear, but what they found was truth. And somewhere deep inside the ship, even in the heart of the alien leader, that truth had begun to grow. For the first time in a long age, the Empire was not certain of victory. For the first time, they were uncertain of themselves. And all because one human girl had dared to stand without fear.